Over a week ago, Samsung delivered on the pre-orders of the Galaxy S21, and for those of you that watched my last video, you know that I have one in Phantom Violet. And while I've been playing with this phone for the past week, week and a half, I've come to the realization that it's very similar to another phone that I had been using. In fact, my previous daily driver, the S20 FE. In fact, they're so similar spec-wise that you would be forgiven for thinking that they're almost the same phone. And that really got me into the mindset of, why don't I do this review as a comparison to this phone? Let's get to it. Okay, right off the bat, let's start with the most noticeable thing about using these two devices, and that is that this phone and this phone are not the same size. As you can see, the S21 is actually smaller than the S20 FE. In the hand, it does feel smaller. This is thinner and also shorter than this phone. Now, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that much thinner and shorter. If you're a person that likes bigger phones, the size difference isn't so big that it really matters. And the resolution, I believe, is the same, so the pixel density is actually greater on the smaller device. It makes it feel a little bit more premium. And something that I've also noticed about the screen of the devices is, while the S20 FE has a very nice display, the borders, the sort of the edge of the screen, the bezel around the edge of the display is actually thicker than it is on the S21, and it's noticeably thicker both on the top and on the bottom, more so on the bottom than on the top. The bottom bezel on the S21 is very noticeably small, while on the S20 FE in comparison is, honestly, it looks like it's twice as thick. It really does. And you don't notice it in daily use, but it was something that really caught my eye while I was using the device. So that is something to sort of understand. Now, compared to the previous generation of the S series, the S21 no longer has a display that can go up to, what is it? Is it Quad HD? Yeah, Quad HD. It does not have a 1440p display anymore. It's 1080p only. In fact, it's basically the same display on the S20 FE, albeit a little bit smaller. It is a 120 Hz 1080p plus display, just like on the FE. Now, personally, I don't care. I never used the 1440p option on my display anyway when I had the ability to use the 120 Hertz option. It just didn't make any sense to me, and for most people, I don't think they'll really care anyway. It is kind of nice to have, but at the same time, I just don't care. I care way more about the fluidity, and frankly, at a device this tiny with such a high pixel density at that point anyway, even at 1080p plus, the pixel density is so high that it just doesn't matter. And I don't think it should matter to you. Of course, to some of you, it will matter. And for those of you that it does matter, you got outnumbered. I guess that's really all I have to say about that. One other thing that I have noticed that I think Samsung specifically does on their cheaper devices, I've noticed this on also the A series as well, is on this front selfie camera, the camera has a metal ring around the camera that when the screen is on, it's not as noticeable, but when the screen is off, man, it really comes out at you. It's this silver metal ring around the selfie camera that really just tells you that there's a camera there and there's nothing you can do to hide it. The S21 does not have that metal ring, and none of the S series that I've seen so far have had that metal ring. I think it's Samsung specifically adding it to their cheaper devices to make them feel cheaper. I'm not really sure what the idea there is, but what it does do, which is a good point towards the S20 FE, is that metal ring actually hides some of the fact that the display doesn't quite go all the way up to the camera. There's still some basically non-functional pixels around the camera, and the metal ring on the S20 FE basically hides those non-functional pixels in a way that is annoying, but does hide them and actually gives the display the appearance of being right up to the edge of the camera, which is actually pretty cool. On the S21, while it is very, very close, and honestly I would say it's about the same distance to the camera, you don't get that same feeling because of that metal ring. So it's more obvious that there is sort of this dead zone around the camera that you can't really take advantage of, which is not that big of a deal. It's a hole punch no matter how you look at it. So I mean, you know, you got what you got, but it does kind of create the illusion on the S20 FE that it's much more dense than it really is. So that's something to think about. Now, the next thing is clearly the design. So this S20 FE takes sort of design cues. It's a combination of design cues from the Note, the original Note 20, not the Note 20 Ultra, the Note 20. The reason I say the Note 20 is because the Note 20 non-Ultra has this plastic back and still has the same camera module as well. So this is very reminiscent of the Note series. The Note 20 Ultra has the same camera module, but this is very more reminiscent to the Note 20 because of the plastic back. The S21 keeps the plastic back, but the camera module is now part of the, it's actually really cool how they did it. So it's designed to look like it's part of the metal frame around the phone. The metal frame around the phone, from sort of just inspecting it, is actually thicker. Now, I didn't notice it at first, but because I sort of just gave up on this phone and then just started using this phone immediately. But while I was taking some test pictures between the two phones, I actually did notice that the metal frame on this phone is thicker, and it is noticeably thicker compared to this phone. This phone, the metal frame is pretty thin, except for where the buttons are. It's a little bit thicker so that it can cover the buttons. But on this phone, the metal frame is much thicker and is noticeably there whenever you're touching the phone. You can feel that smooth metal finish instead of on here where you feel like metal, but it's mostly plastic. So it does actually lead to a more premium feeling. Now, regardless of how you feel about them putting plastic on the back of the phone instead of glass, it does look really good. You have to admit that. Like, it is a bit of a fingerprint magnet. I would say not so much as the glass was. The glass was more of a smudge magnet than anything else. This does get smudges as well, but it's nowhere near as bad as the glasses. Now, the S20 FE in white, and if you get the S21 in white as well, the white just, it does such a good job of hiding fingerprints. It's so amazing at doing that. And the black does a horrible job of hiding fingerprints. You'll see them all day long, and this one is somewhere in the middle. If you care about that kind of stuff, or if you put a case on it and you don't care, I'm sorry I brought it up. I've just wasted your time. I apologize, sincerely. Anyway, the internals are very similar. You've got the 128 gigabytes of built-in storage. The S21 does not have expandable storage. For me, it's not that big of a deal. With a base size of 128 gigabytes, expandable storage really means nothing to me anymore, especially since I upload most of my photos and videos to the cloud anyway, so I can delete them from my device if I need to. The S20 FE did have expandable storage. I never used it. If it was a device that had like 64 gigs of storage, or even 16 gigs or 32 gigs, then it would have been much more, a much bigger deal to me. But frankly, at 128 gigs, I just don't care. Now, if you're someone who uses your device to record a lot of videos and you do care about something like that, then maybe this isn't the device for you. Maybe you should get something that has expandable storage, although nowadays those devices are few and far between. Maybe get something from Sony? Yeah, I guess. Anyway, the cameras, Between the two are pretty similar systems. You have your ultra wide, you have your standard lens, and then you have a 3x telephoto sensor on both of them with your flash on the side. Neither of these have the laser autofocus, and because that was saved for the higher devices. But frankly, the cameras are, for the average person, they're good enough, and I will actually magically switch over to Editor Hiram, and Editor Hiram will tell you more and give you some picture comparisons right now.
All right, let's go over a couple of these pictures, shall we? So this image was taken using the primary 1x sensor on the S20 FE. Now, as you can see, the detail isn't really all there with the fur. You can see it kind of blurs out quite a bit, and I will say that this is a difficult image because the lighting conditions, the lighting conditions on this image aren't that great. This is actually running in my bedroom with a single lamp off to the side, so the detail on things like fur is really, really hard to get on something like that. And then as we move on to the 3x image, as we move on to the 3x image, so this is taken on the S20 FE with the 3x camera. You can see that at this distance, the fur looks even more sort of watercolory. It's really blurred out. There's really no sharpness here whatsoever. At a distance, it doesn't look quite bad, but as you can see, it does look nowhere near as good as the 1x does, where the 1x you really need to zoom in to actually see where it loses focus and gets kind of muddy, whereas on here you can see very clearly up here especially that it kind of looks like a painting and less like an actual photo. Now if we move on to pictures of the from the S21, this is from the 1X, so it's a very similar photo as far as the detail goes. This is the 1X camera on the S21. You can see that the image is still kind of watercolory when you punch in, although I will say that it did do a better job of retaining the detail in the fur here. You can see more individual strands than you could on the 1X over here, where it all just kind of, even the closest point here, you really couldn't see much of the individual details of the fur, except for right around here, where was the biggest spot. But here you could see much more individual detail. These photos were taken at the same distance from the subject, and here we have a 3x. So same thing with the 3x on the S20 FE. You see that sort of watercolory painting kind of look to it, although I will say it does do a little bit better job with the fur once again. As you can see here, it's really hard to make out individual hairs, and as you zoom in it becomes basically impossible to do so, whereas over here you can still sort of make out at least the texture of the fur a little bit better when you zoom in. It is, still a blurry mess, but you can sort of still make out the texture when you zoom in far better than you could over here, where you can't really see the waves in the fur as you could earlier. And then finally we have a couple of night photos. So this is a night photo taken just outside my apartment on the S20 FE. Frankly, the night mode on the Samsung cameras is really, really good. This was a very difficult photo to take. And I think that it did a pretty good job. However, when compared to the S21, it did make me notice some differences, some drawbacks to the S20 FE's camera. So, for example, the shadows in the distance. So this plant over here has a shadow. This is pretty faded out on the S20 FE, where it's a little bit darker on the S21. Also, the S21 does a little bit better of handling colors, as you can see over here with this particular building. So this is supposed to be white and blue. It's hard to catch that with the fact that it is dark outside, and then also with this very yellow light. The light is actually that yellow. It's crazy. So it's kind of hard to capture that color, but the S20 doesn't do as good a job of showing it. It really dyes it with the same yellow from over here, and I can tell you that in person, that building is not dyed yellow with the light. So it looks like there's some sort of weird bleed going over to this side of the image because of the harshness of this yellow. It does also hit the trees quite a bit harder as well. So like there's a section here, the tree, that's really green that you can't really see because of that. Whereas over here, you can sort of see it a little bit better, that that section right there is green, and up here is green, and right there is green. Those parts of that tree are actually green and should be that way. However, I did notice that the S21 did not retain as good sharpness and detail in these night photos. So if I come over here, you can see this tree is just kind of a blurry mess. And when we come over here, you could see it is actually very sharp. So you can barely see what's above these branches here into there on the S21, whereas on the S20 you can very clearly see the individual little branches, and you can even see through them. So while the S20 FE did a better job of capturing individual detail, the S21 did a better job of actually capturing true to life color in these night shots. So I hope you guys enjoyed inspecting these photos with me, and I will send you back to video Hiram now. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back. I'm sorry you had to deal with editor Hiram. He's not very nice, is he? Anyway, I just called myself mean. Usability-wise, there was another thing that I noticed, and that is that the fingerprint sensor, the underscreen fingerprint sensor on these two devices is in different positions. The S21, the fingerprint sensor is actually much higher up than on the S20. So on the S21, the fingerprint sensor is right around here, right there, right like that high up, you know? So like an inch from the bottom, maybe, or 2 inches from the bottom rather, while on the S20 it is only a single inch from the bottom right there. So it's actually much lower on the S20 FE, and what that comes down to is the feeling of the display or the phone being more secure in your hand when you use the fingerprint sensor. While this is in my hand, the fingerprint sensor is just a little bit more secure because my thumb is a little bit higher, so I don't have to do any sort of gymnastics in order to get to the device in a certain position. Whereas with this device, I sort of have to move the device a little bit up in order to get it sideways like that, and it's not a good feeling. Now, as far as wobble goes, this one wobbles a little bit more, but frankly, at the end of the day, they both wobble because of the camera bumps. So what are you gonna do about it? There's not really anything you can do about it. I mean, put a case on it, you won't have any wobble. Honestly, I don't care that much. When you're down here, it's not that big of a deal, and I honestly don't even use my phone when it's flat against the table anymore anyway, mostly because I have a Pixel stand, so I just kind of have it like propped up. But if wobble is big to you, then LG has a phone for you, I guess. Man, it's getting really hard. It's getting really hard to recommend phones to people nowadays. Anyway, those are the biggest things. The other big thing is the processor. So the Snapdragon 888 in the new Galaxy S21 versus the 865 in the Galaxy S20 FE. The 888 is more efficient, and it's also more powerful. It is actually, I wouldn't say it's noticeably more powerful during day-to-day tasks, but when you open up a big game, it does actually feel more powerful. And Qualcomm themselves have gone out and shown numbers to say that the GPU performance itself is about 20% more performant, which is really, really cool. And other YouTubers have done more in-depth reviews to show those numbers and actually back them up, which is really, really cool. You should go watch those videos. Mine isn't going to be about those technical specifications, but it is pretty cool. Another cool thing is the fact that the 5G modem is actually built into the SoC instead of being a separate chip on the board, what you get out of that is the fact that it is better power consumption. So even though this has a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, well, this has a 4,500 milliamp hour battery, the battery life between them has been basically the same. And I think a big part of that is the fact that the 5G modem doesn't eat up battery power on this device like it does on this device. I am basically always on 5G in the area that I live, and I've noticed that the signal is kind of, 5G is interesting. It's like it chooses to go on 5G even if it's would have been slower than LTE. I don't know why it does that, but it does that. However, the S21, I have noticed, switches more intelligently between LTE and 5G than the S20 did. The S20 would stay on 5G no matter what. No matter how weak the 5G signal was, it would stay there and it would not let it go. Meanwhile, the S21, if the 5G signal gets too weak, it will actually switch out of the 5G and drop down to LTE, which would be a stronger and more reliable signal. And it does that a little bit more intelligently while using less power while doing it. So that's pretty cool. Now, at the end of the day, the S21 is not a huge upgrade over the S20 FE. Or the S20, the standard S20. Well, battery life, no, it's gonna have way more battery life. It's gonna have way better battery life than the standard S20. But other than that, it's not a huge upgrade. This is more of an iterative improvement than anything else. However, I will say that if you're the kind of person that likes to have a device that's on the cutting edge, or you just like to always keep your devices up to date just so that you can, stay ahead of updates and manufacturer warranties and stuff like that, then, it's not a bad phone by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, if you have an S10 and you're looking to upgrade, the S21 is an amazing device to upgrade to, and I definitely recommend it. It's just, if you have an S20 FE or even just our standard S20, the upgrade may not seem as logical to you, especially if you have to make a big payment for it. But if you're the kind of person where maybe you really took care of your S20. I'm actually going to trade in my S20 FE, and the trade-in value that I got for this device, it was $550 trade-in credit for this. So I actually got this phone for only $250. That's a steal. That's a steal no matter how you look at it. And for someone like me who likes to be on the cutting edge, that's awesome. And if you're the type of person that likes to be on the cutting edge and you have a device that you would like to trade in, Samsung has a pretty good trade-in program, so I'm not getting anything from Samsung for talking about their trade-in program, by the way. Anyway, what's the conclusion to this video? All right. The conclusion. Is the S21 a good phone? Yes. Is it to an enthusiast a worthwhile upgrade? Yes. Is it a worthwhile upgrade from the S20 or S20 FE for someone who doesn't want to spend money or doesn't care about having those those little upgrades or anything like that, or being on the cutting edge? No. Honestly, no. You can save your device for another year, you can save your device for another year, or wait until third quarter when the Note devices come out and see if the new Note devices are anything, because the new Note devices could be pretty cool. But frankly, I think that for most people, if you have a 2-year contract and you're looking to get a new device, go for it. This device is awesome. If you are just upgraded a year ago and you still have last year's device, don't do it. It's not worth it. It really isn't. If you are an enthusiast and you are bad with money, you're gonna get this anyway. It doesn't matter what I tell you. So do your thing. Anyway, that's all I had to say. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys have a great day, a great night, a great week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.